Illinois Supreme Court says police can search your car if they smell raw cannabis.
Well, starting on July 1st, law enforcement officers will no longer be allowed to use the odor of marijuana as probable cause to search a vehicle. Law enforcement agencies are critical of the change, saying it limits officers' ability to do their jobs. The Harford County Sheriff's Office says it has recovered 19 guns from vehicles they searched based on the odor of marijuana.
It's also important to be able to note that marijuana is still illegal. It's calling another policy into question. Is the smell of marijuana enough for police to search a car?
It's our fundamental constitutional right, so let's start there, Fourth Amendment.
For years, police have used the smell of marijuana as probable cause to search someone's car during traffic stops. It was a tactic that has helped police find drugs and seize illegal guns, but it also led to some questionable searches. However, the Minnesota Supreme Court recently upended that entire practice after a ruling that the smell of weed is no longer enough.
So as you guys can see, there are a lot of differing states that have a lot of differing laws when it comes to this particular issue. But in fact, is there certain things that you can do and certain things that you can avoid if you were to ever be pulled over and the officer cited the smell as a reason for pulling you over or for conducting a further search of your vehicle? So what we're going to do is pop around to a few states like Baltimore, North and South Carolina, Chicago, and Minneapolis and see what the laws are like there, and also have a look at 3 tips that a lawyer suggests that you should do if you end up in a situation where the officer says that they smell something funny. So let's start off with Chicago, because I know a lot of people consider Chicago to be a legal state, but there's a little nuance in their laws that can actually get you locked up if the officer smells something funny. So let's check that out right now.
The Illinois Supreme Court says police can search your car if they smell raw cannabis. While cannabis is legal in Illinois, it is supposed to be stored in odor-proof containers, while in cars, it is illegal to smoke marijuana in cars. Well, today's Supreme Court ruling comes after a previous ruling found the smell of burnt cannabis was not enough probable cause to search a vehicle. Now, in that ruling, the court said that the smell could have come from smoking before getting into the car.
So as you guys can see, it's still a little iffy and still a little bit of a gray area, but actually some may argue that it's pretty clear. Can you actually distinguish between burnt flower, for example, if someone is smoking a J, versus raw flower, which has not actually been smoked yet? It may be possible, but it does open the door to abuse of that rule. Now let's head over to Baltimore, where they actually say something different.
July 1st, law enforcement officers will no longer be allowed to use the odor of marijuana as probable cause to search a vehicle. Lawmakers who passed the bill say since possession will no longer be illegal, then the smell of marijuana shouldn't be a reason for police to search someone's car. Governor Wes Moore allowed the bill to become law without signing it. Law enforcement agencies are critical of the change, saying it limits officers' ability to do their jobs. Harford County Sheriff Jeffrey Gaylor predicts there will be an increase in violent crime. Since March of 2022, the Harford County Sheriff's Office says it has recovered 19 guns from vehicles they searched based on the odor of marijuana.
We, as a profession, remove so many illegally possessed firearms from the hands of criminals who are going down the road based on the odor of marijuana.
And now Gaylor says that while marijuana itself doesn't cause violence, the criminal element around the black market selling the drug is dangerous. Criminal defense attorney Brian Thompson says time will tell on if that black market continues, and says a big factor will be the 9% tax for adult use cannabis.
It'll be interesting to see how the taxation plays out in that realm, whether they keep the taxes high enough that a black market ensues. Because again, the violence, gun violence in particular, has increased significantly over the last 5 or 10 years in marijuana-related distribution activities in Maryland.
On July 1st, officers will still be able to search vehicles if they find probable cause another way.
Now, I don't know what you guys think about that, but it does seem clear to me that police for years have been using that as an excuse to search your car. Now, I have no problem with police arresting criminals and finding illegal firearms, especially when those firearms are being used to commit crimes. But it is really unfortunate and unfair, and also a violation of your constitutional rights, if regular citizens are being searched and harassed simply because the officers claim that they smell something.
The things that happened after the stop was against my Fourth Amendment rights.
That's the same argument Marshall's public defenders made in court, that the smell of marijuana alone was not enough to justify the search.
Any officer could say they smelt the odor of marijuana, and unfortunately, there's no way for us to know later on if that really was the case. We're not there. We're not present. We don't smell it ourselves.
Ultimately, a judge dismissed all charges against Marshall, citing a recent Supreme Court ruling that impacts traffic stops, police searches, and criminal investigations across Minnesota. And we should note in that initial kind of interaction between the driver there and police, the individual had a warrant for him. But it's important to note that that warrant wasn't to search a vehicle. So even though an individual might have a warrant for their arrest, that doesn't necessarily give an officer the right to search a vehicle.
Now, it's super important to understand, guys, the rights guaranteed under the Constitution, in particular your Fourth Amendment right of freedom from search and seizure, improper illegal search and seizure, is super important. So let's dig into that a little bit and hear what critics got to say about that.
Our chief legal analyst, Khalif Rhodes, joins us now. So, Khalif, what exactly is this petition challenging?
It's our fundamental constitutional right. So let's start there. Fourth Amendment, you are protected from unlawful searches and seizures. And so if ever you are stopped or someone is attempting to stop you, they're going to need a warrant to do that, unless there's a couple of things that can happen, specifically unless their officer has probable cause to stop you. So that is exactly what's happening here. In this case, the officer said that he smelled marijuana, and additionally, he smelled marijuana and some type of scent that was covering the smell of marijuana. The individual was convicted for carrying a firearm by a felon and also having marijuana in the vehicle. And then they've appealed it. The Court of Appeals said that, yes, they noted that the smell was enough for probable cause. And the court also noted that the secondary scent was something that the court took into consideration for the probable cause, something that was never seen before. So this case is now being challenged to the Supreme Court to see if that is enough on a couple of grounds. Specifically, hemp being legal since 2015 smells exactly the same as marijuana. So with the nose, now has the law kind of got bypassed since they passed this marijuana hemp legalization in 2015. Smell before has always been something that's been listed, but now if it smells the same as something else that's legal, how can you now be found probable cause for that? That is what the problem is. That's the crux of the case.
It could be a skunk in your car for all
it could be something else, or it could be something legal. And so if you're doing something legal, now the officers don't have a legal right to stop you. They don't have a legal right to search you. And so relying on the scent only of marijuana is problematic. Relying on the scent only in accompanied with a scent cover is also problematic, and that's what this complaint is saying.
Okay, so I have to ask you, so this petition says that the ruling gives police kind of a workaround, allowing them to execute a warrantless traffic search. So talk to us exactly about what that means so people can really understand what that workaround is.
Again, if you don't have a search warrant, and I used to issue search warrants as a chief magistrate, an officer would come to me and they would identify the probable cause which they believe would be a reason that they needed to search you, and I would grant them, and then they would go and search you. But in every other circumstance, when they don't have a search warrant, they have to have probable cause to stop you. And so what this case and what this petition is saying is that you don't have a search warrant and you don't have probable cause, but now you're finding a way to go around that by saying, I don't really smell marijuana, but even if I don't smell marijuana, I smell a high smell of perfume or cologne that's attempting to mask the marijuana smell. So now that's giving me enough for probable cause. And if I can quickly help folks understand the standard, because probable cause is established, it is that you can point to facts or circumstances that a reasonable person will believe that a crime has occurred or that that person has committed the crime. So that's pretty clear. Saying that I smell like a lot of cologne is not enough.
So let me know what you guys think about that when it comes to the smell. Do you think that the smell should be enough for probable cause? Do you think that the smell accompanied with something else, like if you spray a bunch of Axe in your car, a bunch of perfume, cologne, air freshener, who knows? Do you think that that should be enough for probable cause? And just a quick reminder, guys, if you're getting value from this video, please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support us further, hit the link in the description down below and join the ICANN VIP Bean Club, or cop some merch from ICANNFam.com. But if you guys did end up in a situation where you got pulled over, there are a few things that you guys should and should not do, and this lawyer actually suggests 3. So let's have a look at that right now.
Can the odor of marijuana by itself establish probable cause for an officer to search your car on a traffic stop? We're going to talk about that today, and really the answer is it depends. It depends on what state you're in, and it depends on the facts of your situation. This issue happens all over the country. We see it taking place all of the time. Police officers rely upon this all the time. In fact, they use this as a tactic in order to get into your vehicle and establish probable cause. And so think about this for just a minute. For decades, this has been used as a tactic because why? If marijuana is illegal in the state that you're in, then arguably they could make the determination that if they smell the odor of marijuana, then that might establish enough evidence to then warrant a search, a warrantless search, right? They don't have to get a warrant. They can now at that moment search your vehicle. So let's identify some of the states that we know have fought against this and it's no longer applicable. And let's talk some distinctions between what state you might be in and how it affects you. So let's first start off. One of the examples that we see here in Maryland, one of the laws that was passed, it basically says 10 grams or less of marijuana has been decriminalized. And so as a result of that, the appellate court has come back and said that the odor of marijuana by itself is insufficient to establish reasonable suspicion of criminal activity and not enough to establish probable cause for a search as well. Same thing in Colorado. The Colorado Supreme Court also threw out drug convictions in 2019, and since then, based upon that the police had no reasonable suspicion or justification whatsoever to hold in one example, a man in his truck, waiting for a dog to show up, a drug dog to show up, and then they sniffed his vehicle. They threw out that conviction because they said, why? Well, marijuana is legal in that state, and because it is legal, it has been officer to do anything case in every state. For example, in Michigan, the Michigan Supreme Court has said that it is permitted. Now, even though that if here's the rule in Michigan, if it's anything less than 2.5 ounces of pot, then that has been decriminalized. But anything above 2.5 ounces is still against the law. So as a result of that, they've come back and said, well, because there is some illegality associated with possessing marijuana, then we're going to say if the officer smells it, then there may be a chance there's more than 2.5 ounces there. So it's allowed there.
That's pretty interesting. I know that there are some states that have different laws when it comes to what amounts are criminalized and what amounts are decriminalized. So for example, out in Michigan, it's 2.5 ounces. Out in Colorado, I believe it's 1 ounce. And a lot of places it usually is 1 ounce or thereabouts. But that being said, if your flower just smells super dank, like you got some really nice homegrown, you got a 1/4 ounce of some dank homegrown, that can still smell. So the officer may smell that and he may think that that's more than 2.5 ounces, but it's really just a 1/4 ounce. So that's a really interesting distinction right there. I want to find out what you guys think about that.
For example, is in Florida, even though, in every one of these states, the laws change to some extent every year. Medical marijuana is allowable, just like it is in Texas. If you have what's called a Texas Compassionate Care Act card, if you're approved through a doctor. But they have said because it's only legal for medicinal purposes, if an officer smells the odor of burnt marijuana, that can be the basis for them to then have a search of your vehicle, and therefore it's legal. Okay, so notice one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is the state that I'm in, is marijuana illegal or is it legal? If it's illegal, then there's a very good chance that the courts are going to rule that the so-called whiff of pot is the basis for them to be able to do a search without a warrant. So that can be enough to establish reasonable suspicion, or in this case, probable cause, to be able to search your vehicle. If you're in a state where it's completely legalized, like you're talking about Colorado, you're talking about the example of in Maryland, then you're going to be more protected there. Okay, so let's talk about how to handle this situation when you're dealing with a police officer. Let's say he comes up to you. Here you are in your car. You've been pulled over. Now the officer's going to go and speak to you like he did Mr. Dixon here and start asking you some questions. What should you do? Now, in fact, before I even break down the exact steps you should take, I want you to know I have seen literally thousands of police reports at our criminal defense law firm, what a lot of police officers in Texas will do. They will be following you for a certain period of time, similar to what they did to Mr. Dixon, and they'll look for any ticky-tack reason to pull you over, for any traffic violation. For instance, let's say you stopped right over the crosswalk at a stop sign or at a stoplight. They'll use that and say, "Ooh, traffic violation. You didn't stop far enough back." Or maybe you signaled a lane change, but you didn't do it within 50 feet, or they believe that you didn't do it within the time frame provided under your traffic code, depending on what state you're in. What they'll do is they'll make estimates on that, and they'll use that as a basis to establish reasonable suspicion to pull you over. Well, the moment they pull you over, what are they going to do? And now they want to interact with you and start having conversations. And if there's something they either see in plain view, or there's something they just don't like about the way something smells, whatever that is, because remember, it's going to be the officer's word against your word at that point. Now they can use it as a basis to search your vehicle. So I want to remind you about this. It's extremely important here that you're careful about this. In states like Ohio and Texas, it's very common that officers will have a canine unit, a drug dog, literally nearby. I've seen it where an officer pulls someone over to give them a traffic ticket, which many times they don't even write the traffic ticket. They just use that as the basis to pull them over.
We actually seen that in a video that we went through recently where a councilman was pulled over for a 4-gram blunt, and the officer literally said, "You can even hand me over the blunt, give it to me, or I can bring the dogs so we can search everything."
And then there will literally be a drug dog 30 seconds away, and they're using anything they can as a basis to then be able to search that vehicle or run the drug dog around that vehicle. Okay. So let's discuss this for a few minutes as we look at this. First of all, what are some of the steps you should take if you find yourself being pulled over and maybe that's the situation? You've done nothing wrong. Number one, when an officer comes up and approaches you, roll down your window slightly, hand them what's required in your state. Most of the time that's going to be certainly your driver's license. That's normally required. And in many states, you're going to be required to provide registration of your vehicle. Why? Because if you don't provide proof of registration, that's actually a traffic offense. That can be a basis for the officer to now search anyway. So if you're not at least following the basic traffic laws and you don't have proof of registration, that can be a basis for the officer to do more. So, but you don't have to engage in any conversation. The most important thing is be polite, be quiet, provide them the proof, let them run it, and just basically don't open your mouth any further. Number two, don't engage in any small talk. I know this is hard. Many times people will want to engage in small talk. You'll feel nervous. The officer will walk up and start speaking to you, and you'll feel like you have to just continue to talk. This is actually what the officers are trained to do. If they can get you to talk more and more and more, they're allowed to now be able to establish that they don't like either your body language or they feel like you were holding something back, or they can use that as a basis now to establish probable cause, potentially to search your vehicle. So one of the things you can do is don't engage in any small talk. And if the officer starts asking you a number of direct questions, trying to aggressively get you to engage in conversation or ask where you're coming from, where you're going, what are you doing, what's in your car. Remember, you can exercise your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, but you must actually say it. There's case law out there that if you just remain silent without actually exercising that right, the officer can actually use your silence against you. I actually have a video that I covered this issue. This is really important to remember. So what do you say? Officer, I exercise my right to remain silent and I refuse to answer any other questions. That's number two. Number three, ask the officer if you are free to leave. Understand how the way cops work. A lot of times what they're going to do is they're going to walk up to you and they're going to start speaking to you. They'll grab your driver's license, your registration. They'll go run to see if you have any warrants, and then they'll walk back up to you and start this small talk. But what they're really going to be doing is trying to delay as long as they can. If they're going to claim they smell the whiff of pot coming from your car, they're also likely going to call for a drug dog to come out because they're going to want to do a more thorough search. Or even if they don't smell, let's say they don't smell pot at all and they don't use that as an excuse, they're going to want to prolong this so they can have the drug dog show up. So one of the things that's really important for you to do is to ask, officer, am I free to leave? This will force the officer to answer one way or the other. If he answers no, then now you have made it clear you wish to leave and you're asking if you are free to leave. And now the clock has definitely been going and starting here because an officer is not allowed to prolong a traffic stop any longer than is necessary in order to write you that ticket. This is established Supreme Court law. So by doing this, you're letting the officer know you know the law, and you're also you're helping your attorney. You're helping your attorney so that in the future, if this becomes a prolonged traffic stop that then leads to a search, that leads to an arrest, your actual attorney can file a motion to suppress to potentially get the entire thing thrown out in court. Okay, so that is a critical point. Officer, am I free to leave? If he says yes, politely roll up your window and drive away. If he says no, officer, at this time I exercise my right to remain silent. I refuse to answer any questions. And then hold pat.
So as you guys can see, there are a lot of things that you guys can do if you guys are in that type of situation, and those 3 tips are really useful. Definitely comply, give them whatever they ask for in terms of the documentation, your driver's license, your registration, your insurance. Those are usually required. Hand it to them, but don't engage in small talk. Stay quiet. I always tell people stay quiet, mouth is zipped. But you also want to be careful with how you stay quiet, because if you just stay quiet, you don't say you're exercising your Fifth Amendment right, that can also put you in hot water. So say respectfully, officer, I'm exercising my Fifth Amendment right to stay quiet. I shall not answer any questions. And then you can ask them, am I free to leave? And that also will help you figure out whether you're being detained or whether you're free to go. Now, if you're living in a country that does not actually have Fifth Amendment rights or some sort of right that's similar to that, what you can do is stay quiet and ask the officer to speak to your attorney. Call your lawyer, stay quiet, don't say anything, because anything you say can and will be used against you as evidence in a court of law. So always keep that in mind, guys. No matter where you're at, do not volunteer any information, stay quiet, and do what they ask. only what they ask. And that's usually limited to providing your documentation, license, insurance, and registration. So all these are really useful things if you guys ever end up in that type of situation. So drop it in the comments down below and let me know what you guys think about that. And also let me know if you were ever in a situation where you got stopped and searched by an officer. Let me know how it went. Let me know how that experience was for you. Drop it in the comments. I'm gonna be down there hanging out to find out what you guys gotta say. Now sometimes you could be pulled over in a routine traffic stop and things can go south really fast, like in this particular situation where the driver was pulled over and he had a legal firearm, and in trying to disarm him, the officer actually shot the driver. So if you want to find out more about that, check it out because it's coming up right now.